Hello everyone. So today I wanted to have a look at some functions questions and specifically inverse function questions. So inverse function questions look a little bit like this. So you're given your function in the first place and then you're asked to find the inverse of it. If you're unsure on functions in general on this notation, have a look into that first and then come back to this video because the inverse ones are a step up from that. So you want to be fairly comfortable with finding that. Okay, so first of all I'm going to talk about the purpose of inverse functions. You may well have remembered from possibly primary school, possibly year 7, that sort of time, doing something called function machines in your lessons. And your function machines would be something like you might have sort of an input here, and then you would have sort of maybe a square followed by a circle. They were usually sort of quite sort of bright and colourful, and then you'd have an output there, and it might say something like times by 2 and then plus 3 and I don't know, minus 10, and you'd put your input in and you times it by 2, add 3, take away 10, and then you get your output. The idea of inverse functions is that you put in your output and you work your way back to get your input, which you probably would have done as well within these function machines. So you'd go from here and you'd add 10 rather than minus 10, and then you take away 3 and divide by 2. Obviously that's a sort of very basic concept, but it's essentially exactly what these are doing. So this function, it's saying to times whatever your number is by 2 and then you're adding 5, and when we find this inverse function it's going to tell us how to go backwards just by putting it into a formula. And obviously you can get some quite complicated functions, so you know it is a little bit more advanced than this, but that's the basic idea behind it, and I'll show you how we can check our answers using that at the end. But here's how you work it out. The first thing you want to do is take your function here and say that rather than f of x, let's call it y, and the other side's going to be the same. So rather than f of x equals 2x plus 5, we're going to say y equals 2x plus 5. To be honest, you can call this whatever you want because we are going to get rid of this y at one point, but it's just a little bit easier to work with y, rearranging it around. You're probably much more comfortable, much more used to using that. So that's the reason why to use y. The next thing is we want to make x the subject. So we want to move this 5 across by taking it away. So we're going to have y minus 5 equals our 2x, and then you want to divide by 2. So we're going to have x equals y minus 5, all divided by 2. All you have to do at this stage, and this is a little bit strange because it's very unlike what you're kind of used to with maths, because we're just going to swap a few things around. Rather than it being x equals, we're actually going to have it that it equals this here, so our f to the minus 1, or our inverse function of x, equals. Obviously that's what we're asked for, so often you'll get one of these questions and it will quite literally have in the sort of answer box f to the minus 1 of x equals, so that's kind of your clue for that. You know we're asked for that, so it's got to be that equals. And our function's in terms of x, so rather than y, it's going to be x. But other than that, it's still that x minus 5 divided by 2. So those sort of switch around I know are a little bit alien, and that does get a little bit of getting used to, but a little bit of practice and it's not too bad. As I said, you know your functions in terms of x, so it makes sense that it's an x in there, and you're asked to find this, so that's why that switch there. Now I mentioned I'm going to talk about how you can check your answers using this sort of concept here. So let me take our original function that we had here, and let's say we're going to find f of 5, for example. Now, as I said, I'm hoping you're sort of comfortable with doing this bit from before, so I'm going to quickly just put that in. So we're going to do our 2 times by 5, which obviously gives us 10, plus the 5, which gives us 15. Then let's try and find f to the minus 1, or our inverse function of 15. So in other words, taking our output here. Then what we're going to do is we'd have our 15, take away our 5, so that would give you 10, and then divided by the 2 gives us 5, which was our input in the first place. So it's a nice little check, especially if you've had one that's a little bit more complicated to rearrange and you're not quite sure about your rearranging. Put in some numbers, put in simple numbers, don't put anything complicated in. You know, you could have put in a 10 or a 2 or whatever you're comfortable in. You could even put in 1 if you wanted to. So very simple numbers you want to put in, but it's just a really, really quick, nice little check. And as long as this happens, so as long as you end up with your input that you started with, then you know it's right. Often questions will lead you into this as well, so you might get a question where you're given this and you have to find f of 5, for example, and then you know you've already got that, and then the next step is to find your inverse function. So it's quite an easy little step to do to check your answer. Okay, I'm just going to do one more of these just so we can run through that method again. So underneath, I'll just draw sort of a line under that. Okay, so this time let's have a look at f of x equals, and let's do x squared minus 7, something like that. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to say that y equals this. So we're going to have y equals our x squared minus 7, and then we want to rearrange it to make x a subject. So we're going to first move that 7 across, so y plus 7, because it was a minus here, so when we move it across it's going to become a plus, and that equals x squared. And then some of you will be familiar with this, some of you might not be. If you want to sort of move this squared across as such, what you would do is you'd find the square root here. So in other words, a step from here to here would be the square root of y plus 7 equals x on its own. So that might be something that's a little bit new, but it's not too sort of far-fetched, because you know that the opposite of squared is going to be square root, so that makes sense. Okay, and then we've just got to put all that sort of notation, switch it all around. So rather than x, it's going to be f to the minus 1 of x, and then rather than y, we're going to have x. So we'll have x plus 7 in our square root. Again, you could substitute in some quick numbers here to double check this, but once you're comfortable with it, obviously you don't necessarily need to do that step. Okay, so we'll leave those there. Feel free to sort of practice a few of these. There's loads of places you can find these questions online, so give these a go. You're looking for inverse functions, and if you have any further questions, please do ask me. Feel free to leave any comments below, or send me a message. And if you are interested in one-to-one tuition with myself, then all the information is on my Facebook page, my website. Feel free to have a look, or just send me a message if you want any more details. But other than that, thank you very much, and I will see you again in the next video.